Ethan Cross awoke to a sensation both foreign and overwhelming. The air was thick with the scent of wild flowers and damp earth, the distant hum of unseen creatures vibrating through his bones. His body ached, a dull, punishing reminder of his fall from the sky. Slowly, his vision adjusted, revealing towering figures surrounding him, their elongated forms obscured by the flickering glow of a massive bonfire. He wasn't alone. A dozen giantesses, each easily over twice his height, stood in a loose but deliberate circle around him, their golden eyes gleaming with an unreadable mixture of curiosity and wariness. Their forms were both elegant and terrifying, powerful bodies clad in leather and cloth spun from what seemed like exotic fauna. Their skin ranged from sun-kissed bronze to cool shades of dusk, their features strikingly beautiful yet wholly alien in their scale. Ethan's breath hitched. He was defenseless, outnumbered, completely at their mercy. A woman stepped forward, taller than the others, her physique a perfect blend of lethal grace and commanding presence. Her black hair was braided tightly, falling over one shoulder, and her piercing gaze locked onto Ethan with the intensity of a predator assessing its prey. "You live," she murmured, her voice a rich alto laced with amusement and something darker beneath. The words were not English, yet somehow, Ethan understood. His mind reeled. Was it their language, or had something in the atmosphere altered his perception? He swallowed, his throat dry. "Where am I?" The gathered women stiffened, exchanging glances as if surprised by his speech. A second figure stepped forward, this one draped in robes woven from moonlight and shadow, her silver hair cascading down her back. There was an ethereal quality to her, a softness that contrasted with the warrior beside her. "Do you know what you are?" she asked, tilting her head. Ethan frowned. "I'm human. A pilot. My ship." He turned his head, searching for wreckage, but found none. The jungle canopy loomed overhead, vines and massive flowers swaying despite the absence of wind. The realization settled uneasily in his stomach. The first woman scoffed. "A frail thing like you, dropped into our lands speaking our tongue. Strange." She crouched before him, her presence suffocating, assessing him like a puzzle she had no patience to solve. "I am Zyra, first blade of the Titanist tribe. This is Lenara, our High Seer." She jerked her chin toward the robed woman. Lenara stepped closer, her golden eyes gleaming with interest. "You fell from the heavens, yet you breathe our air. The gods must favor you." Ethan exhaled sharply, regaining a fraction of his composure. If he wanted to survive, he had to think fast. "I don't know about gods, but I didn't come here on purpose," he admitted. "My ship malfunctioned. Crashed. I don't even know what planet this is." Zyra's expression remained unreadable, but Lenara's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You are on Valeria Prime, home of the Titanist tribes," she said. "And you, little starfaller, are the first human to ever set foot here." Silence thickened the air. Ethan's stomach coiled with unease. First? That meant they had no precedent for what to do with him. Zyra rose to her full, staggering height. "The council must decide your fate. Some of my sisters believe you are a gift, others—" Her smirk returned, sharp as a blade. "Think you are prey." Ethan's pulse kicked up. "I'd rather not be the latter." "Then prove your worth," Zyra countered smoothly. "Our laws are simple. The weak do not belong." A challenge. The tension among the gathered women made it clear. This was a test, not a negotiation. Ethan squared his shoulders. "And how exactly do I do that?" Lenara's eyes flickered with interest. "Survive. The test of fire." The jungle swallowed him whole. Ethan sprinted between towering trees, his breath ragged as the distant sound of pursuing footsteps thundered behind him. They had given him 1 hour to evade capture, to prove he had value beyond being a curiosity. If he failed, he would be cast into the wilds, left to fend for himself against creatures he couldn't even begin to comprehend. His mind raced. "Think, damn it. You're not stronger. You're not faster. But you're smarter." Spotting a cluster of vines hanging from an ancient tree, Ethan pivoted sharply and climbed, using his smaller frame to his advantage. He scaled high, pressing himself against the thick bark, listening. The thunderous footsteps slowed. A shadow moved below Zyra. She tilted her head, listening, her massive form eerily silent for someone so large. Ethan held his breath. Then, without warning, she lunged, a knife flashing through the air. Ethan barely dodged, landing in a crouch as she vaulted onto the branch beside him with impossible agility. "You're quick," she mused, a hint of respect in her tone. Ethan exhaled sharply. "I prefer resourceful." Zyra's smirk widened. "Let's see how far that gets you." She struck, lightning fast. Ethan barely rolled away in time, grabbing a loose vine and swinging off the branch. He landed hard but didn't stop, forcing his body forward. Survival meant adapting. He had no weapons, but he had his wits. Spotting a cluster of flammable plant fibers, Ethan grabbed a handful, stuffing them into a hollow tree trunk. Using a piece of broken metal from his suit, he struck it against the stone, sending sparks flying. The fire roared to life. When Zyra leaped into the clearing, her golden eyes reflected the flames, something new flashing across her face. Amusement. Interest. Approval. "You know fire." Ethan, breathless, nodded. "Humans figured it out a while ago." A slow, knowing smile played on her lips. "Perhaps you are not as fragile as I thought." The other Titanesses emerged from the jungle, their expressions shifting from indifference to consideration. Lenara stepped forward, studying Ethan like a scholar appraising a relic. "You intrigue me, Starfaller." Zyra crossed her arms. "You may have bought yourself more time, human. But time alone will not make you one of us." Ethan met her gaze, his heart still pounding from the chase, from the thrill of survival. "Then I guess I'll have to keep proving myself." The firelight danced between them, illuminating the silent challenge in Zyra's smirk and the quiet curiosity in Lenara's stare. One thing was certain, Ethan's journey had just begun. Ethan's muscles ached, his breath still uneven from the chase through the jungle. The firelight flickered in the clearing, casting long shadows across the massive forms of the Titanesses encircling him. Their expressions ranged from skepticism to intrigue, their golden eyes reflecting the flames like molten gold. Zyra stood before him, arms crossed, her stance commanding. "You've proven you can run," she said, voice edged with dry amusement. "But speed alone will not earn you a place among us." Ethan exhaled sharply, straightening. "Then what will?" Lenara, who had been watching with an unreadable gaze, stepped forward, her long silver hair catching the fire's glow. "The council has spoken," she said smoothly. "Tomorrow, you will face the rite of binding." A murmur rippled through the gathered Titanesses. Some exchanged glances, others narrowed their eyes, watching Ethan as though he were a specimen under scrutiny. He frowned. "And that is?" Zyra smirked, tilting her head. "A trial. One that will decide whether you are worthy to remain among us, or if you are nothing more than a fragile anomaly." Ethan swallowed hard. "That's vague." Lenara's lips curled in amusement. "Then you will just have to survive long enough to understand it." The dawn of reckoning. Ethan awoke to the crisp scent of morning dew and the distant hum of the jungle. The village around him was stirring. Massive structures crafted from woven vines and ancient stone formed a settlement that blended seamlessly with the towering trees. Despite the beauty of his surroundings, his stomach coiled with unease. He had no illusions. If this trial was designed to break him, he couldn't fight them head-on. He had to think to adapt. As he stretched, the heavy thud of approaching footsteps drew his attention. Zyra loomed over him, an unreadable expression on her face. "Time to move, human!" Ethan pushed himself up, eyes scanning her. "You're enjoying this." Her smirk deepened. "More than I should." She tossed him something, a crude dagger, its obsidian edge shimmering in the morning light. Ethan caught it, frowning. "You'll need it." That didn't bode well. The rite of binding. The Titanesses gathered at the edge of a vast sacred ravine, its depths veiled in mist. Vines draped over ancient stone bridges, while bioluminescent fungi pulsed faintly along the cavern walls. Ethan stood at the center, clutching the dagger, every instinct telling him this would not be a fair test. Lenara raised her hands, her voice carrying an almost melodic cadence. The rite of binding is our ancient law. Those who wish to remain among us must prove their resilience, strength, and loyalty. Zyra stepped beside her. The challenge is simple. She pointed across the ravine, where a massive creature lurked, a six-limbed beast with razor talons and eyes like glowing embers. Ethan's stomach dropped. That was not simple. Lenara's gaze softened. You are not expected to kill it. Ethan exhaled. That's reassuring. You are expected to survive it. Less reassuring. Before he could question further, Zyra shoved him forward. The ground gave way beneath him. Ethan barely had time to curse before he hit the jungle floor, rolling to absorb the impact. A guttural growl rumbled behind him. He turned, heart hammering. The beast emerged from the shadows, a towering, nightmarish predator with serrated fangs and sinewy muscle rippling beneath its dark hide. Its nostrils flared, sensing him. Zyra's voice called from above. Run, human! Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He darted between massive roots, his mind racing. Fighting was suicide. Outmaneuvering it? Maybe possible. The beast lunged. Ethan barely dodged, tumbling through thick underbrush. The crash of its claws splintering bark sent adrenaline surging through him. He spotted a natural trap, a cluster of unstable rock formations near the cavern's edge. If he could lure it there. Gritting his teeth, he whistled sharply. The beast snarled, charging him head-on. Ethan bolted toward the outcrop, leading the monster into the precarious terrain. As soon as he reached the crumbling ledge, he twisted at the last second, flinging his dagger into the nearest support rock. The impact sent the entire structure collapsing. The beast let out a screech as the ground beneath it crumbled, sending it plummeting into the mist below. Silence. Ethan collapsed onto his back, panting. Above, the Titanesses watched. Zyra's smirk was gone. Lenara's expression was unreadable. Ethan had done more than just survive. He had outwitted a creature that had likely claimed the lives of warriors before him. Slowly he stood, brushing dirt from his sweat-soaked skin. Then, with deliberate boldness, he lifted his gaze to Zyra. Well? For the first time, she looked at him not as an outsider, but as something more. The aftermath. The celebration was unlike anything Ethan had expected. Massive feasts, tribal chants, and drinks strong enough to burn his throat. He sat among them, no longer a prisoner. Zyra approached, holding a ceremonial pendant. You earned this. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A prize? A warning, she corrected. Wear it, and you are bound to us. Her tone was firm, but something flickered in her gaze, something softer than before. Lenara appeared at his other side. Few impress Zyra. Fewer still survive her tests. Ethan smirked. I'm full of surprises. Zyra leaned in, her voice a whisper. Then keep surprising me, human. The fire crackled between them, but something else ignited that night. Something neither of them could ignore. And Ethan had no intention of stopping now. The village pulsed with the aftermath of the night's celebration. The rhythmic drumbeats had faded, replaced by the low murmur of dawn's quiet stirrings. Smoke curled from the dying embers of the communal fire, carrying the scent of charred meat and spiced herbs. Yet, beneath the morning calm, a silent tension coiled. Ethan sat at the edge of a stone outcrop overlooking the jungle, his fingers idly tracing the pendant Zyra had given him. It was no simple trinket, it was a symbol, a mark of his binding to the Titaness tribe. He had earned his place, but the question remained, what did that mean? Heavy footsteps disrupted his thoughts. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. You didn't run, Zyra said, her voice tinged with amusement. Ethan smirked, still studying the pendant. Figured I'd see how this binding thing works first. Zyra folded her arms, the morning sun catching the metallic plates of her arm bracers. It means you belong to the tribe now. No turning back. He finally glanced up, meeting her gaze. And you? You seem different. Her lips parted slightly, as if caught off guard, but she masked it quickly. "You're not as fragile as I thought. That changes things." Ethan stood, brushing dust from his pants. "I'll take that as a compliment." Zaira exhaled sharply, a huff of reluctant amusement. She stepped closer, the gap between them shrinking. "Lenara thinks you're something rare, something valuable." "And you?" Ethan asked, voice quiet. For the first time since he had arrived, Zaira hesitated. The moment stretched between them, unspoken questions thickening the air. Then, before she could answer, a distant horn blared through the jungle. Zaira's expression hardened instantly. "Raiders! The Blood Debt." By the time Ethan reached the village's main clearing, the Titanesses had assembled, their bodies adorned in war paint, weapons drawn. The air vibrated with unspoken fury. Lenara appeared beside him, her golden eyes shadowed with worry. "The rival tribe has come to claim a blood debt." Ethan frowned. "From who?" Lenara's gaze flickered toward Zaira, who stood at the head of the warriors, spear in hand. Ethan's stomach tightened. This was personal. Before he could ask, the enemy arrived. They were Titanesses, like Zaira's tribe, but their armor was darker, their presence less disciplined and more primal. Leading them was a figure that made even the tallest warriors tense, Vekara, the warlord of the Vargon clan. She was massive, even by Titaness standards, her brown skin marred with scars that told a story of countless battles. Her gaze locked onto Zaira, a cruel smile tugging at her lips. "You thought I forgot," Vekara drawled. "You took something from me, First Blade." Zaira tightened her grip on her spear. "Your claim is old, and I owe you nothing." Vekara laughed, the sound deep and cruel. "Then let's settle it the way we were meant to." Her gaze flicked to Ethan, and something predatory flashed in her eyes. "Unless you're hiding behind your little human now." Ethan's fists clenched, but Zaira didn't so much as flinch. "I will fight," she said simply. The village erupted in cheers, not of excitement, but of solemn approval. This was a warrior's justice. Ethan, however, felt a sharp, unrelenting sense of dread. The duel. The arena was nothing more than a wide, flat expanse of packed earth, its borders marked by carved stones and ritual glyphs. The sun burned high, casting elongated shadows as Zaira and Vekara faced each other, bare of armor but wielding twin spears. Ethan stood at the edge of the circle, heart pounding as Lenara murmured beside him. "This is a fight to the death." His throat went dry. "No way to stop it?" Lenara shook her head. "To interfere is to disrespect the laws of the Titaness tribes." Ethan clenched his jaw. Damn their laws. The duel began. Vekara struck first, her speed unnatural for someone her size. Zaira sidestepped, parrying the spear with a swift movement. Dust kicked up around them as they clashed, their strikes shaking the very ground. Ethan could barely follow the battle. It was brutal, primal, yet strangely beautiful. Each movement was honed, each attack calculated. Zaira fought with a predator's precision, but Vekara was stronger, heavier, relentless. A sudden feint, Vekara shifted, using her size to slam Zaira backward. She hit the ground hard, her spear tumbling from her grasp. Ethan's breath caught. She wouldn't recover in time. Vekara raised her weapon for the final blow. Something inside Ethan snapped. He moved. The pendant Zaira had given him swung against his chest as he lunged into the circle, defying the ancient laws. A sharp gasp rippled through the onlookers. Zaira's golden eyes widened. "Ethan no!" But it was too late. Vekara hesitated just long enough for Ethan to act. With a burst of desperate speed, he dove low, grabbing a handful of sand and flinging it into her eyes. The warlord roared in frustration, staggering backward. Zaira seized the opportunity. In a single, fluid motion, she retrieved her spear and drove it into Vekara's chest. A choked gasp. The warlord stumbled, then fell to her knees, disbelieving. Silence. Zaira, chest heaving, locked eyes with Ethan. Something raw and unspoken passed between them. Then, the silence broke into chaos. Aftermath. Ethan had barely made it out of the arena before the elders summoned him. Zyra stood beside him, face carefully unreadable. "You broke the law," one of the elder warriors said, her voice grave. "By all rights, you should be cast out," Lenara interjected smoothly. "And yet, without his interference, Zyra would have fallen. Does that not mean fate willed it?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered Titanesses. The eldest among them stepped forward. "You are not one of us by birth, human, but today, you proved you would risk everything for one of our own." Ethan barely had time to react before Zyra grabbed him by the collar and pulled him into a fierce, heated kiss. It wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was a warrior's claim. When she pulled back, her smirk returned, softer this time. "You're either the bravest or the stupidest human alive." Ethan chuckled, still catching his breath. "Maybe both." The elders exchanged glances, then finally nodded. So be it. The decision was made. Ethan was no longer an outsider. He belonged to the Titaness tribe now. And Zyra? She was his, and he was hers. The fires of the Titaness tribe burned low, their embers smoldering beneath the weight of what had transpired. The air carried the scent of iron and earth, the remnants of battle still lingering. Ethan stood at the edge of the gathering, his mind a storm of emotions. He had defied the sacred laws, stepping into the duel that was meant to be Zyra's alone. And now, he was no longer an outsider. He was one of them. Yet, as he stood beneath the towering stone monoliths of the Warriors' Hall, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. Zyra, the indomitable First Blade, stood near the center of the firelit chamber, her golden eyes unreadable. The scarred elders surrounded her, their expressions heavy with deliberation. His fate was still uncertain. One of the elders, her skin as weathered as the stones they stood upon, raised her staff and spoke. "You have risked much, human. Laws were broken." She let the words settle before continuing. "But you also saved one of our own. A warrior no less." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Some voices carried approval, others held veiled resentment. Ethan squared his shoulders. "I'd do it again." A pause. Then a chuckle. It came from Zyra. Her voice, though still laced with strength, had softened slightly. "Of course you would." She stepped forward, stopping just before him, her presence electric. "You risked your life for me." Ethan smirked, though his pulse was pounding. "You're acting like you're surprised." Her golden gaze burned into him, searching for something deeper. Then, in a move that sent a shock through the onlookers, she grabbed him by the jaw, her fingers rough yet deliberate, and kissed him again, this time slower, claiming something more than just victory. It was not the wild, impulsive kiss from before. This was deliberate, primal, undeniable. The silence that followed was absolute. When she pulled away, her voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for him. "You belong to me now, Starfaller." The words should have sounded possessive. They should have been intimidating. Instead, they ignited something in him. But before he could respond, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This will have consequences." Lenara. She emerged from the shadows, her silver hair catching the light, her expression somewhere between intrigue and unease. Ethan glanced at her, reading between the lines. Lenara was no fool, she had always seen deeper than the others. "What do you mean?" Zyra asked, shifting slightly, her stance protective. Lenara's golden gaze flickered to Ethan. "There are whispers beyond the jungle. News of Vekara's death will travel." She hesitated, something grim beneath her words. "And her sister rules the northern clans." Zyra tensed. "Velkana." Ethan frowned. "Another warlord?" Lenara nodded. "More ruthless than Vekara ever was. And now, she has a reason to march south." A hush fell over the room. Ethan felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He had not only changed his own fate, he had set something greater into motion. Zyra exhaled, turning back to him. For the first time, he saw it, the worry she rarely let show. "You didn't just save me," she murmured. "You started a war. The night of truth." The night air was thick with tension. Ethan sat by the river's edge, listening to the rhythmic lap of water against stone. Footsteps approached. He didn't turn. He knew who it was. Zaira lowered herself beside him, her usual confidence tempered by quiet contemplation. "I should be furious with you," she muttered. Ethan chuckled dryly. "Wouldn't be the first time," she huffed. "No. This is different." Her voice lost its edge, dipping into something almost vulnerable. "You changed everything." He turned to her, his gaze searching hers. "Did I ruin it?" A pause. Then, she surprised him. "No." The admission was soft but carried weight. Ethan reached out, brushing a stray strand of dark hair from her face. Zaira didn't pull away. For a woman who had spent her life guarding herself, this was more than surrender, it was a choice. "I've never had someone do what you did," she admitted. Ethan smirked. "What, risked my neck for you?" Zaira's lips twitched. "No." She shifted closer, her fingers ghosting over his forearm, testing, searching. "Make me feel like I'm worth it." Something clenched in Ethan's chest. She had been strong for so long, carried expectations heavier than any blade. And now, for the first time, she was allowing herself to be something else, with him. Slowly, carefully, he closed the distance between them, pressing his forehead against hers. "You are," he whispered, "worth all of it." Her breath hitched. Then, finally, she let go. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him down into another kiss. But this one was different. This was not a challenge, not a test, not a warrior's claim. This was a choice. A new war, a new future. By dawn, the camp was stirring. The warriors prepared for the storm they all knew was coming. Ethan stood beside Zaira, watching as scouts returned from the outer jungle. The first sightings of Velkhana's war bands had already been reported. Zaira exhaled. "We don't have time." Ethan adjusted the leather bracers one of the warriors had given him. "Then we make time." She arched an eyebrow. "Are you so eager to throw yourself into another fight?" Ethan grinned. "Only if I'm fighting beside you." Zaira studied him for a moment, then smirked. "You really are the strangest human I've ever met." Lenara approached, interrupting. "The council has made their decision." Ethan turned. "And?" Lenara's eyes gleamed. "You are no longer just bound to Zaira." She extended her hand, palm upward. "You are bound to us all." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. He was no longer just a visitor, or even just Zaira's. He was a Titanous warrior now. Zaira nodded in approval, then turned toward the jungle. "Then let's give Velkhana a reason to fear us." Ethan smirked, stepping forward. Side by side, they walked into the unknown, together. Because this was no longer just about survival. This was war.